Trust. It's such a fragile thing. One moment it feels unbreakable, and the next, it shatters into pieces you can never put back together. That's how my story begins. Not with a smile, not with laughter, not even with hope. It begins with the silence that comes after betrayal. My name is Daniel. And for the longest time, I believed I understood people. I thought I could look into someone's eyes and know if they were loyal, if they were real. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The person I trusted the most, the one I would have defended with everything I had, turned out to be the one who twisted the knife when I wasn't looking. And yet, what they never expected was how I would respond. Because when trust breaks, it doesn't just leave scars. Sometimes, it plants the seed of a revenge so quiet, so patient, that when it finally blooms, the whole world notices. At first, nothing about my life seemed extraordinary. I was an ordinary man, working an ordinary job, living in an ordinary city. But sometimes, betrayal doesn't need a grand stage. It only needs two people, and the fragile thread that ties them together. For me, that thread was trust, and once it broke, nothing was ever the same again. I can still remember the first time I met him, Marcus. He had that easy smile, the kind that makes you feel like you've known him your whole life. People trusted him instantly. I trusted him instantly, and why wouldn't I? He carried himself like someone who'd stand by you no matter what. Little did I know, behind that smile was a shadow I hadn't yet seen. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At the time, he was more than just a friend. He was a brother. We worked side by side, shared dreams, celebrated small victories. I let him into my life in ways I never allowed anyone else. And that's the cruel part about betrayal, isn't it? It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the ones we open our hearts to, the ones we trust without hesitation. Looking back now, there were signs. Subtle, quiet, almost invisible. Like whispers in the dark. Moments where his laughter didn't quite match his eyes. Pauses that lingered too long. Stories that didn't always add up. But I ignored them. Because when you trust someone, you don't search for cracks. You build bridges over them. And maybe that's why the fall hurt so much more. The night everything changed still replays in my head like a film on loop. I didn't know it at the time. But that was the night Marcus betrayed me. The night my world began to collapse. And the night I unknowingly began planning the revenge that would one day make headlines. You see, betrayal doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk through the front door and introduce its name. It seeps in quietly, like a shadow at sunset, spreading slowly until it covers everything. For me, it came disguised as laughter, as promises, as a voice that said, "Don't worry, I've got your back." And I believed it, until the moment I realized he never had my back. He was standing behind me only to push me closer to the edge. I can still hear my mother's words echoing in my head. "Daniel, be careful who you trust. A smile can hide 1,000 lies." I laughed at her wisdom then, brushed it off as old-fashioned suspicion. But later, those words felt like prophecy, because the smile that once felt like comfort would become the very mask that haunted me. But let me ask you something. What do you do when the person you trust most betrays you? Do you scream? Do you fight? Do you walk away and let them win? Or do you wait? Wait for the perfect moment. Wait until every piece falls into place. And then strike so quietly, so unexpectedly, that the world itself stops to watch. That's the path I chose. And it's why my revenge wasn't just personal. It became a story whispered about, written about, a story that made headlines. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning, to when everything felt normal, even safe. Because understanding the depth of betrayal means you first have to understand the strength of the trust that was broken. I want you to feel what I felt, the warmth of friendship, the comfort of trust, the illusion of loyalty. Only then will you understand why my quiet revenge carried the weight it did. I remember sitting across from Marcus at a cafe one rainy evening. He was telling one of his wild stories, waving his hands dramatically, making everyone around laugh. I was laughing too. Not because the story was funny, but because that's who he was. The kind of person who could light up a room. And in that moment, I thought, I'm lucky. Lucky to have someone like him by my side. I didn't know then that the same man making me laugh would one day make me question everything. But that's the cruel beauty of betrayal, isn't it? It wears the face of someone you'd never suspect. It doesn't knock at the door dressed as danger. It sits at your table, drinks your coffee, and smiles at you. All while hiding the storm it's about to unleash. If you've ever been betrayed, you know the feeling. The shock, the disbelief, the way your stomach drops as if the ground itself disappeared beneath you. And if you haven't, then listen closely. Because one day you might, and maybe my story will prepare you for it. But don't mistake this for a story about sadness. Yes, it begins with heartbreak. Yes, it begins with broken trust. But where it ends is something far more powerful. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about patience, about justice, about the kind of quiet revenge that doesn't need shouting. doesn't need chaos. Because when it lands, it leaves the world speechless. So lean in and listen carefully, because the betrayal I faced didn't just test me, it transformed me. And the revenge I carried out didn't just bring me peace, it made history. This is my story, the story of how one man's betrayal pushed me to the edge, and how my quiet revenge echoed louder than any scream ever could. They say every story has two sides, one that shines in the daylight, and one that hides in the shadows. Before the betrayal, before the silence, before the headlines, there was light, there was trust. There was something that felt unbreakable. That was how Marcus and I began. It was 5 years ago, in a city that never seemed to sleep. I had just started working at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, the kind of place where the lights in the office stayed on long after the sun had set, where dreams were built on late nights and strong coffee. I was new, ambitious, eager to prove myself. Marcus? He was already there. A rising star, the kind of employee everyone admired. He carried himself with confidence, but never arrogance. He was the type of person who made you feel like you belonged, even when you didn't. That's how our friendship started. Not with some grand gesture, but with something small. It was my first week on the job, and I was drowning in paperwork, trying to understand the system, the clients, the endless details. Everyone else walked past my desk, too busy to notice. But Marcus stopped. He leaned over, saw the confusion on my face, and said with that easy smile, "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Let me show you a shortcut." It was nothing. A simple gesture, a small moment. But sometimes, that's all it takes. From that day forward, Marcus wasn't just a coworker. He became a mentor, a friend, someone I thought I could trust with anything. We started working together on projects, staying late at the office, grabbing cheap dinners at the diner down the street. It felt natural, effortless. We shared ideas, secrets, even frustrations about life. Before long, our bond wasn't just professional. It was personal. And when two people spend that much time together, trust doesn't just grow. It feels inevitable. Marcus had a way of making you believe in him. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but people listened when he spoke. He wasn't the smartest by the book, but his instincts were sharp. And for me, in those early days, he was everything I thought a true friend should be. We talked about dreams, starting our own firm one day, building something that wasn't just about clients and deadlines, but about vision. We promised each other that when the time was right, we'd do it together. It sounded ambitious, maybe even naive. But when you trust someone, even the impossible feels possible. Looking back now, I can see it. The subtle red flags, the moments that should have made me pause. Like the time he brushed off an accounting error with a laugh, saying, "Don't worry about it, nobody will notice." Or when he told a story that didn't quite add up, but he smiled so confidently, I convinced myself I had misheard. There were times he was late to meetings, blaming traffic or a bad morning, but showing up with excuses that felt a little too polished. And once, just once, I caught him in a lie. Something small, something meaningless. But he brushed it off so casually, I told myself it didn't matter. Because when you trust someone, you don't search for cracks. You paint over them. You tell yourself the wall is solid, even as it begins to crumble. Our bond only grew stronger. We weren't just friends anymore. We were partners. We launched small projects together on the side, testing the waters, learning how to take risks. And with every success, my trust in him deepened. I remember one night vividly. We had just landed our first independent client, a small business that had taken a chance on us. We celebrated with cheap champagne in my tiny apartment, laughing until the sun came up. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, raising his glass. "One day, people are going to know our names." I believed him. I believed every word. But what I didn't realize was that he already had a different plan. A plan that didn't include me the way I thought it did. There were small signs in his behavior, but at the time, they felt meaningless. Moments when he'd avoid direct eye contact during serious conversations. Times when he seemed too interested in how much I made, or how I managed my savings. The way he always wanted to handle the contracts himself, brushing me aside with a smile. "Don't worry, Daniel, I'll take care of it." Those words became a refrain, a comfort. But now, when I hear them in my memory, they sound different. They sound like the prelude to a betrayal I wasn't ready for. But still, in those days I trusted him completely. We shared more than work. We shared lives. I introduced him to my family. He came to dinners, birthdays, celebrations. My parents loved him. My sister called him the brother I never had. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. Because the deeper the trust, the deeper the cut when it's broken. There's a certain blindness that comes with loyalty. You stop asking questions. You stop doubting. You stop protecting yourself. Because you don't believe you need protection. And I was blind, so blind. I remember a conversation we had late one night, sitting on the roof of our office building, looking out at the city lights. I asked him what he feared most. He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "Losing everything. But if you're with the right people, that'll never happen." I smiled back, comforted by his words. But in hindsight, I wonder now, was he talking about me? Or was he already planning his escape even then? As the months turned into years, our partnership grew. So did our friendship. And with it, so did my blind faith. I didn't know it then, but every handshake, every promise, every laugh we shared was leading me closer to the night my trust would collapse. And when it did, it wasn't just betrayal, it was destruction. But before that night, before the storm, there was calm. And in that calm, I gave him everything. My time, my trust, my belief. I gave him the keys to a friendship I thought could never break. And he used those keys to unlock the very door that would bring me down. If I had paid attention, maybe I would have seen it coming. Maybe I would have connected the dots. But I didn't. Because sometimes hope blinds you more than lies ever could. And so, with every red flag ignored, with every doubt silenced, I walked deeper into the trap without even knowing it. That was how it all began. Not with betrayal, but with trust. Not with anger, but with laughter. Not with revenge, but with dreams. And that's the tragedy of it, isn't it? The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. And Marcus, he was the brightest light in my life. Until the night he became my darkest shadow. Betrayal doesn't come with thunder. It doesn't scream or announce itself. It arrives quietly. Like a whisper you almost don't hear. Like a shadow you don't notice until it's already too late. And for me, that whisper came one ordinary night. It was late. The kind of late where the city had fallen into silence except for the distant hum of traffic. Marcus and I had been working on a big deal. A contract that could take our small partnership to the next level. For weeks we had poured our energy into it, side by side, dreaming about what it could mean for us. That night, he told me he'd handle the final meeting with the client. "Don't worry, Daniel," he said with that same confident smile. "I'll make sure everything goes smoothly." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I went home, exhausted but hopeful, not realizing that this was the night my trust would shatter. This was the night that would change everything. The first crack came not from Marcus, but from silence. I waited for his call, the update he promised after the meeting. Hours passed. Nothing. I told myself he must be busy, maybe celebrating the win for us. But deep down, something felt wrong. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. Marcus wasn't there. Odd, he was always the first one in. When he finally walked in, hours later, his tie was loose, his smile tired. "Everything went fine," he said quickly, brushing past me. "I'll fill you in later." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. It wasn't the words. It was the way he avoided my eyes. Later that afternoon, I found out the truth. A colleague from another firm, someone who had heard whispers about the deal, pulled me aside. "Daniel," he said carefully, "I thought you and Marcus were doing this together." Confused, I nodded. "We are." His eyes narrowed. "Then why is Marcus's name the only one on the contract?" The words hit me like a blow. I laughed at first, shaking my head. "No, that can't be right. You must be mistaken." But I wasn't ready for what came next. He pulled out his phone, showed me the article that had just gone live online. Young entrepreneur Marcus Hale lands major contract. His photo, his name, his triumph. Nowhere, not even in the fine print if one was I mentioned. My heart stopped. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I scrolled through the article again and again, searching desperately for my name, for any sign that I still existed in the story we had built together. But I was invisible, erased, and in that moment something inside me cracked. When I confronted him later, he didn't even flinch. He just shrugged as if everything was normal. "Daniel, listen," he said smoothly. "This is business. You're still part of the team, but the client wanted a single face, a single name. It was easier this way. Easier this way. As if my trust, my effort, my dreams were just extra weight he could cut off without a second thought." I tried to argue, my voice shaking. "But we built this together, Marcus. Every late night, every idea, it was us. How could you do this?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. You'll get your share. Just let me handle things. Trust me." Those words. Trust me. The same words that once comforted me now felt like poison. I went home that night in silence. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our friendship, every laugh, every promise. And all I could think was it all a lie? Had Marcus been planning this all along? Was every late night, every toast, every word of encouragement just another step in his plan to cut me out? The betrayal wasn't just in the deal. It was in the history we shared, in the fact that he had looked me in the eyes, called me a brother, and still chose to erase me. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, more cracks began to appear. Clients I thought we had landed together started calling only him. Opportunities we were supposed to share somehow became his alone, and whenever I tried to confront him, he smoothed it over with practiced charm. "Relax, Daniel. I've got this under control. Don't worry." But I wasn't relaxed. I was unraveling. Friends I had introduced to him began drifting toward his orbit. He charmed them, pulled them closer, while I was left standing in the shadows. Even my family noticed the change. "You and Marcus aren't as close as you used to be," my mother said one evening, concern in her eyes. I forced a smile, brushed it off, but inside I was burning. Because I knew what had happened, but I couldn't yet accept it. The final blow came one evening when I stumbled across an email, one I wasn't supposed to see. It was from Marcus to a client, detailing his plans for expansion. Every word painted a future for him, but I was nowhere in it. He wasn't just pushing me aside. He was building a world where I didn't exist. That was the night I finally understood. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me once. He had been betraying me for months, maybe years, and I had been too blind to see it. Anger, sadness, disbelief. They all collided inside me, a storm I couldn't control. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him, demand answers, demand the truth. But when I looked at him, calm, collected, untouchable, I realized something chilling. Marcus wasn't sorry. He wasn't even ashamed. To him, betrayal wasn't betrayal. It was strategy, and I was just collateral damage. That realization changed me. It hardened me. It lit a fire I didn't know I had. Because betrayal breaks you, but it also wakes you up. And in that moment, I knew. I would not let this end with me broken. I would not fade into the shadows while he stole everything we had built. No. If Marcus wanted to play this game, then I would play too. But not loudly, not recklessly, quietly, patiently. Because sometimes, the loudest revenge is the one nobody sees coming. I had no idea that night, staring at the glowing screen with his email burning into my mind, that I had just taken my first step towards something far greater. A plan. A quiet, calculated revenge that would one day bring him to his knees. But in that moment, all I felt was the weight of betrayal, the sting of broken trust, and the haunting realization that the man I once called my brother was now my enemy. I remember the silence after the storm. Betrayal doesn't scream at you forever. Sometimes it leaves you with a suffocating quiet that feels heavier than any shouting could. After the truth came crashing down on me, I found myself sitting alone, staring at the pieces of my life as though they were shattered glass scattered across the floor. I didn't know where to begin picking them up, or if I even wanted to. The first nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every single moment in my head like a cruel movie on repeat. Every smile, every word, every promise, twisted now into lies. And with every replay, I kept asking myself the same desperate question. How could I have been so blind? It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt. It was the memory of the trust I had given so freely. Trust is not something you hand out carelessly. At least not for me. When I gave it completely. And to watch it being trampled on, crushed so effortlessly by someone I thought I knew, it broke something inside me. When the news spread, because betrayal always finds its way into the mouths of others, my friends were quick to take sides. Most of them were furious on my behalf. "How could they do this to you?" one friend spat out, unable to contain her rage. "You don't deserve this," another insisted, trying to comfort me even when I couldn't comfort myself. But family was different. They carried the disappointment heavier than I did. My mother's eyes, soft and weary, told me everything without words. She wasn't angry at me, but she was broken-hearted for me. My father, on the other hand, went silent. He always believed I was strong, unshakable. Seeing me reduced to tears made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't express. Yet even as they tried to be there for me, I withdrew. I didn't want pity. I didn't want constant reminders of what had happened. I wanted silence. But in that silence, my mind turned against me. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe I wasn't enough. Not smart enough. Not strong enough. Not worthy enough. Self-doubt crawled into me like a parasite, feeding on my pain, twisting every thought until I no longer knew who to blame. Them or myself. Every time I saw their face in my memory, smiling like nothing was wrong, I felt rage bubbling up. And then, just as quickly, guilt. Because anger was easier than admitting that I was shattered. Anger gave me something to hold on to, while grief only left me drowning. I would look into the mirror and barely recognize myself. The person staring back looked tired, drained, with eyes that carried storms no one else could see. "This isn't me," I whispered once, my voice shaking. But in that moment, I realized something chilling. Betrayal changes people. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait. It just takes the person you were and burns them to ashes, leaving behind someone you're forced to meet for the first time. It was a small moment, really. A single ordinary evening. I had been scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to escape the constant cycle of thoughts when a picture popped up. A memory from better days. A smiling face, arms around mine, promises in their eyes. My chest tightened as if someone had physically struck me. I threw the phone across the room and screamed. It wasn't just the photo, it was the realization. They went on with their life as if nothing happened. As if my heartbreak was just a side effect they didn't have to care about. That moment was my breaking point. Tears blurred my vision. But underneath them, something else stirred. Something darker. Something I had been suppressing. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It wasn't even just anger. It was something sharper, something colder. The seed of resolve. I didn't speak it out loud, not even to myself. But in the quiet corners of my mind, a plan began to take root. At first it was vague. Just a whisper of a thought. They can't get away with this. I brushed it off, tried to silence it, but it kept returning. Every time I replayed the betrayal, the whisper grew louder. They need to feel what I felt. And yet, revenge wasn't what people imagine. It wasn't fire and fury, no. It was colder, quieter. Like ice forming over a lake, unnoticed until it's thick enough to hold weight. I began to notice things differently. Small details, small opportunities. A piece of information here, a connection there. I wasn't plotting yet, not fully, but I was watching, waiting, preparing. No one around me knew. To my friends, I was just healing. To my family, I was slowly getting better. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't healing. I was hardening. I told myself one thing. If betrayal can break me, then justice can rebuild me. The seed was planted, and though I didn't know when or how, I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't going to end with me as the victim. Revenge, I learned, is not a roar. It's a quiet machine you build piece by piece with patience and precision. It doesn't rely on luck or tantrums. It relies on timing, knowledge, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. After the betrayal, my head was a storm of anger and grief, but anger alone would have ruined me. So I did the only sensible thing. I turned that storm into a plan. Step 1. Gather the truth. Before you can move, you have to see clearly. I started with facts, not rumors, not what people said at late-night drinks. Real evidence, contracts, emails, meeting notes, phone records, little things Marcus had assumed nobody would keep. I pulled every file I had, then asked for backups. I logged conversations. I wrote down dates, times, names, everything. I made a map of our work together, and slowly, a pattern began to form. This was important. Revenge built on emotion collapses. Revenge built on proof stands. Step 2. Watch without being seen. I stopped confronting people. I stopped making dramatic scenes. Instead, I became quiet, almost invisible. I watched Marcus from a distance. I listened when he talked to clients. Watched how he handled praise. Tracked who he called late at night. I didn't spy like someone desperate for gossip. I observed like someone taking notes for a court case. There were things he did not expect me to notice. The way he favored certain phrases when drafting proposals. The email patterns that repeated at odd hours. Small details that, when pieced together, would make his polished image crack. Step 3. Build allies quietly. A plan needs people, not loud supporters, but careful allies who value truth. I reconnected with a few old colleagues who had drifted away. I met with them one by one, not to plot, but to share facts. I didn't use anger to rally them. I used clarity. I showed how things had actually happened, how some deals had been redirected, how credit had been taken. People responded not because they loved me more than him, but because they respected honesty. They began to watch, too, some with skepticism, some with relief. But most important, they were paying attention. And in business, attention is power. Step 4. Control the narrative. Marcus was good at headlines. He knew how to be seen, how to be celebrated. I realized early on that to outmaneuver him, I couldn't just expose him. I had to change the story everyone believed. So I started shaping a quieter narrative. I prepared statements, not of rage, but of facts. I wrote down the timeline of our partnership, annotated with receipts, with witness names, with time-stamped evidence. I practiced saying it calm and clear. Because when you speak from certainty, people listen. When you speak from fury, they tune out. Step 5. Protect myself legally and financially. This step felt unromantic, but it was vital. I met with an attorney. Not to sue in a fit of revenge, but to understand my options, my rights, and the consequences of every possible move. I audited my finances, separated what was mine from what had been commingled, and secured copies of contracts. I tightened my accounts. I closed loopholes he might exploit. Revenge that risks your own ruin is not revenge. It's punishment for yourself. Step 6. Create leverage. Leverage doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be a forgotten document, an overlooked email, an honest witness who remembers a key meeting. I assembled those pieces into a portfolio, organized and undeniable. Not every piece was explosive on its own, but together they formed a pattern of decisions made without me, of credit taken, of promises broken. I also started to collect small, seemingly innocuous things. A draft that showed he changed terms, a message that hinted at a side agreement, a voice memo that contradicted his public claim. No single item was a knockout blow, but combined, they were a mirror. And mirrors show truth. Step 7. Time the reveal. Revenge without timing is waste. I watched the calendar. I tracked his launches, his big meetings, the nights he expected to be celebrated. I waited for a moment when the world was ready to look, and when he least expected scrutiny. There was something satisfying in the patience. It felt like waiting while a photograph develops in a dark room. The image is there, faint at first. You can't touch it. And then slowly, it comes into focus. Step 8. Keep the moral high ground. This was non-negotiable. I refused to become what he was. Petty. Reckless. Reckless in a way that would never heal. My strategy was not to humiliate him publicly in a way that crossed lines. I wanted exposure, yes, but I wanted it to be measured. The goal was to correct the record, reclaim what belonged to me, and hold him accountable, not to destroy for sport. So everything I did was anchored in truth and restraint. I double-checked every claim. I removed anything that could be construed as personal vendetta. My plan became legal, factual, and precise. That restraint made my moves sharper and morally unimpeachable. Step 9. Test the waters. Before going big, I tried small probes, a careful question to a mutual client, an offhand mention to someone who had influence, a subtle correction in a public forum. Each probe was designed to measure reaction. Did people believe me? Did they dismiss me? Which allies would step forward? Those probes gave me valuable feedback and allowed me to adapt. Every time someone reacted in my favor, even slightly, it strengthened the plan. Every skeptic I converted was another piece of the machine clicking into place. Step 10. The quiet strike. When the time finally came, there would be no dramatic courtroom shouting. There would be a calm, precise exposure, a compiled set of documents shared at the right time, with the right people, so that the pattern could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. It would land where it mattered, with clients, with partners, with the people who mattered to his reputation. The strike would be surgical, not sensational. The goal was not to watch him fall in flames. It was to make the truth impossible to ignore and to reclaim my place. As I put the pieces together, tension grew. Would it work? Would people believe me? What if he had prepared for this? What if he turned it on me and painted me as vindictive? Those questions sat at the back of my mind like a low, persistent drumbeat. Sometimes I wondered if I was being cruel to myself, keeping all of this hidden behind a mask of normality. But every time doubt crept in, I returned to the facts on my table, to the faces of those who had been honest with me, to the emails stamped with dates that couldn't be rewritten. There was another thought that kept me steady. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper that becomes a fact, then a truth, then a headline. My revenge would not be about applause. It would be about restoration. The plan was not pretty. It was not romantic. It was precise, patient, and above all mine. I had been betrayed. Now I would answer with clarity. And in the quiet hours, when the city slept and the lights went out one by one, I would sit with my notes and imagine the moment everything came into focus. When the truth, like a mirror, would finally reflect the man I had trusted and reveal him exactly as he was. Revenge, I learned, is not a roar. It's a quiet machine you build piece by piece, with patience and precision. It doesn't rely on luck or tantrums. It relies on timing, knowledge, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. After the betrayal, my head was a storm of anger and grief. But anger alone would have ruined me. So I did the only sensible thing. I turned that storm into a plan. Step 1. Gather the truth. Before you can move, you have to see clearly. I started with facts, not rumors. Not what people said at late-night drinks. Real evidence. Contracts, emails, meeting notes, phone records. Little things Marcus had assumed nobody would keep. I pulled every file I had, then asked for backups. I logged conversations. I wrote down dates, times, names, everything. I made a map of our work together, and slowly, a pattern began to form. This was important. Revenge built on emotion collapses. Revenge built on proof stands. Step 2. Watch without being seen. I stopped confronting people. I stopped making dramatic scenes. Instead, I became quiet, almost invisible. I watched Marcus from a distance. I listened when he talked to clients, watched how he handled praise, tracked who he called late at night. I didn't spy like someone desperate for gossip. I observed like someone taking notes for a court case. There were things he did not expect me to notice. The way he favored certain phrases when drafting proposals. The email patterns that repeated at odd hours. Small details that when pieced together would make his polished image crack. Step 3. Build allies quietly. A plan needs people, not loud supporters, but careful allies who value truth. I reconnected with a few old colleagues who had drifted away. I met with them one by one, not to plot, but to share facts. I didn't use anger to rally them. I used clarity. I showed how things had actually happened, how some deals had been redirected, how credit had been taken. People responded not because they loved me more than him, but because they respected honesty. They began to watch too, some with skepticism, some with relief. But most important, they were paying attention. And in business, attention is power. Step 4. Control the narrative. Marcus was good at headlines. He knew how to be seen, how to be celebrated. I realized early on that to outmaneuver him, I couldn't just expose him. I had to change the story everyone believed. So I started shaping a quieter narrative. I prepared statements, not of rage, but of facts. I wrote down the timeline of our partnership, annotated with receipts, with witness names, with time-stamped evidence. I practiced saying it calm and clear. Because when you speak from certainty, people listen. When you speak from fury, they tune out. Step 5. Protect myself legally and financially. This step felt unromantic, but it was vital. I met with an attorney. Not to sue in a fit of revenge, but to understand my options, my rights, and the consequences of every possible move. I audited my finances, separated what was mine from what had been commingled, and secured copies of contracts. I tightened my accounts. I closed loopholes he might exploit. Revenge that risks your own ruin is not revenge. It's punishment for yourself. Step 6. Create leverage. Leverage doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be a forgotten document, an overlooked email, an honest witness who remembers a key meeting. I assembled those pieces into a portfolio, organized and undeniable. Not every piece was explosive on its own, but together they formed a pattern of decisions made without me, of credit taken, of promises broken. I also started to collect small, seemingly innocuous things. A draft that showed he changed terms, a message that hinted at a side agreement, a voice memo that contradicted his public claim. No single item was a knockout blow, but combined, they were a mirror, and mirrors show truth. Step 7. Time the reveal. Revenge without timing is waste. I watched the calendar. I tracked his launches, his big meetings, the nights he expected to be celebrated. I waited for a moment when the world was ready to look, and when he least expected scrutiny. There was something satisfying in the patience. It felt like waiting while a photograph develops in a dark room. The image is there, faint at first. You can't touch it. And then, slowly, it comes into focus. Step 8. Keep the moral high ground. This was non-negotiable. I refused to become what he was. Petty, reckless. Reckless in a way that would never heal. My strategy was not to humiliate him publicly in a way that crossed lines. I wanted exposure, yes, but I wanted it to be measured. The goal was to correct the record, reclaim what belonged to me, and hold him accountable. Not to destroy for sport. So everything I did was anchored in truth and restraint. I double-checked every claim. I removed anything that could be construed as personal vendetta. My plan became legal, factual, and precise. That restraint made my moves sharper and morally unimpeachable. Step 9. Test the waters. Before going big, I tried small probes. A careful question to a mutual client. An offhand mention to someone who had influence. A subtle correction in a public forum. Each probe was designed to measure reaction. Did people believe me? Did they dismiss me? Which allies would step forward? Those probes gave me valuable feedback and allowed me to adapt. Every time someone reacted in my favor, even slightly, it strengthened the plan. Every skeptic I converted was another piece of the machine clicking into place. Step 10. The quiet strike. When the time finally came, there would be no dramatic courtroom shouting. There would be a calm, precise exposure. A compiled set of documents shared at the right time, with the right people, so that the pattern could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. It would land where it mattered, with clients, with partners, with the people who mattered to his reputation. The strike would be surgical, not sensational. The goal was not to watch him fall in flames. It was to make the truth impossible to ignore, and to reclaim my place. As I put the pieces together, tension grew. Would it work? Would people believe me? What if he had prepared for this? What if he turned it on me and painted me as vindictive? Those questions sat at the back of my mind like a low, persistent drumbeat. Sometimes I wondered if I was being cruel to myself. keeping all of this hidden behind a mask of normality. But every time doubt crept in, I returned to the facts on my table, to the faces of those who had been honest with me, to the emails stamped with dates that couldn't be rewritten. There was another thought that kept me steady. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper that becomes a fact, then a truth, then a headline. My revenge would not be about applause. It would be about restoration. The plan was not pretty. It was not romantic. It was precise, patient, and above all, mine. I had been betrayed. Now I would answer with clarity. And in the quiet hours, when the city slept and the lights went out one by one, I would sit with my notes and imagine the moment everything came into focus, when the truth, like a mirror, would finally reflect the man I had trusted and reveal him exactly as he was. Revenge does not come all at once. It arrives in steps, quiet, deliberate, almost invisible until it's too late to stop. When the day came to put my plan into motion, the world outside was calm, almost deceptively so. Birds chirped, cars passed, and life carried on as if nothing monumental was about to shift. But inside me, every nerve was alive. It felt as though the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for me to act. I didn't launch with fire or fury. No, I began with silence. It started with a single message. I drafted it carefully, every word sharpened like glass. A short, polite email sent to one of Marcus's most important clients, a name he bragged about constantly. In it, I presented a small inconsistency. Nothing dramatic, nothing overt. Just a gentle question, backed with evidence I had collected. Was this detail overlooked? Because the original agreement shows something else. The message was calm, professional, undeniable. At first, nothing happened. But 2 days later, I heard whispers. The client had gone back to Marcus for clarification. And he, smooth talker that he was, tried to explain it away. But explanations are fragile things when evidence is clear. A seed of doubt had been planted. That was all I needed. One seed. From there, the dominoes began to fall slowly. A correction at a public forum. A clarification slipped into a casual conversation with another associate. A set of files shared with someone Marcus had overlooked. Someone who still cared about the truth. Piece by piece, his perfect image began to wobble. People didn't accuse him outright. Not yet. But they started to wonder. And Marcus, he noticed. I saw it in his eyes during a meeting we both attended. The confident smirk he always wore faltered for a second when a client asked a question he wasn't prepared for. It was subtle, but I saw it. That flicker of doubt. That crack in the mask. For the first time, Marcus looked less like a king, and more like a man trapped in his own lies. The real move came weeks later. I had been patient, waiting for the perfect stage. And then, it arrived. Marcus was set to present at a high-profile investor event, one that would decide the future of his projects. He had built it up for months, boasting about the partnerships he'd secured, the success he'd claimed as his own. It was the perfect setting. The night before the event, I distributed a carefully compiled packet of documents. Not to everyone, just to a select few. People of influence. Investors who prided themselves on detail. Journalists who loved uncovering inconsistencies. Each packet contained timelines, receipts, and comparisons between his claims and the actual records. Every page clean, precise, undeniable. I didn't need to tell them what to think. The truth spoke loudly enough. The hall was glowing with lights that evening, filled with polished shoes, crisp suits, and the hum of ambition. Marcus walked in as though the world belonged to him. Shoulders back, smile wide. The perfect picture of confidence. He didn't know yet that the ground beneath him was already shifting. He began his presentation. Smooth voice, powerful gestures, promises wrapped in charm. For a while it worked. The crowd was nodding, smiling, believing. And then the questions started. One investor raised his hand. His tone was polite, but his words were sharp. Mr. Carter, could you clarify the timeline of this deal? Because I've seen documents that suggest a different date. Marcus paused, just for a fraction of a second. But silence is dangerous when you're supposed to have all the answers. He recovered quickly, laughing it off, offering a vague explanation. But before he could move on, another voice cut in. And what about the contract terms? Because according to these records, they don't match what you've presented here. The room shifted. People leaned forward. Laptops opened. Packets appeared in hands. Whispers rippled like waves in a storm. Marcus tried again. He argued, deflected, smiled wider. But with every answer, someone had another question. Another detail. Another piece of evidence. And then came the moment I will never forget. One journalist, seated near the front, stood and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. Mr. Carter, can you explain why your proposal matches word for word the one submitted by your former partner, except with their name removed? The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus froze. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. The room stared at him, not as a leader, not as a visionary, but as a man caught in the middle of his own deceit. In the days that followed, the fallout was unstoppable. Investors withdrew. Clients demanded explanations. Journalists published stories that spread faster than he could contain. His polished reputation, the one he had built on my back, on my trust, crumbled in front of everyone. But here's the thing. I never once had to raise my voice. I never once had to call him out by name. The truth did all the work for me. And Marcus, he tried. Oh, he tried to fight back. He painted me as bitter, as vindictive. But the facts drowned out his accusations. No matter how loud he shouted, the documents, the timelines, the undeniable truth stood taller than his excuses. People didn't believe him anymore. His charm had expired. His mask had shattered. But what shocked me most wasn't his downfall. It was what came after. People, clients, friends, even strangers, began reaching out to me. Not just to congratulate me, but to apologize. They confessed that they had suspected something was wrong but were too afraid to speak. They admitted they had seen red flags but ignored them. I realized then that Marcus's betrayal hadn't been only against me. He had woven his lies into many lives, and exposing him didn't just set me free. It set them free too. That twist, that ripple effect, was more powerful than I had imagined. My revenge was not just personal anymore. It became collective justice. I saw Marcus one last time, weeks after his empire had collapsed. He was sitting alone in a quiet cafe, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. The man who once filled every room with arrogance now looked like a shadow of himself. He saw me, our eyes met. For a moment I thought he would speak, maybe beg, maybe rage, but he didn't. He just looked at me, opened his mouth slightly, and closed it again. Because what could he say? There are no words when truth itself has spoken louder than you ever could. I walked past him without stopping. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Not because I had destroyed him, but because I had reclaimed myself. My revenge was complete, not in fire, not in fury, but in silence and certainty. But revenge has a price, and though I had won, I began to realize that victory is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it's only the beginning of another lesson. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered everywhere. When Marcus's mask finally fell and the truth spilled out into the open, it wasn't with thunder or flames. It was quieter than that, like a building collapsing from within, one brick at a time, until there was nothing left standing. For days, his name lived on the lips of investors, clients, colleagues, and reporters. Not as a man to be admired, but as a warning. His reputation, once untouchable, had become fragile glass, shattered beyond repair. The calls began almost immediately. Some came from old colleagues who had distanced themselves long ago. I always wondered, they admitted. Now it makes sense. Others came from clients, their voices a mix of disbelief and betrayal. They weren't angry at me. No, they were angry at him. Angry that they had trusted him, invested in him, defended him. One by one they withdrew. Contracts dissolved. Partnerships ended. Invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. Slowly, the circle that had once adored him began to close in on itself, leaving Marcus isolated. I didn't smile when I heard the news. I didn't celebrate. I just listened. There was no need for gloating. His downfall was writing itself in the choices of others. Marcus tried at first to fight back. He posted long statements online, filled with half-truths and twisted words. But words are fragile when weighed against evidence. Each claim he made was quickly countered, each excuse torn apart by facts. His voice grew weaker with every attempt. And then, he went quiet. The silence was louder than any denial could have been. Rumors spread. Some said he had left the city, others that he was trying to rebuild under a different name. I didn't care enough to find out. His silence was enough for me, but his collapse didn't just affect him. It rippled outward, touching everyone who had believed in him. Some colleagues questioned their own judgment. Others felt relieved, as though a weight they didn't realize they carried had finally been lifted. And strangely, many turned to me, not for sympathy, but for guidance. They wanted to know how I had seen what they didn't, how I had found the strength to act when so many stayed silent. I wasn't a hero to them, but I had become a reminder that truth, even whispered, can outlast lies shouted from a stage. And me? For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that didn't taste like poison. The heaviness I had carried, the constant ache of betrayal, began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like shadows lifting at dawn. I didn't feel joy in his ruin. That was never the point. What I felt was release. Freedom. The knowledge that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the lies, that I hadn't been foolish for trusting. The truth had validated me in ways words alone never could. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, expecting the same suffocating dread as before. But then I'd remember. It's over. The game is finished. The truth stands, and I don't have to fight anymore. Looking back, I realized something profound. Revenge had given me clarity, but it hadn't healed me. Healing came after, in the quiet moments, in the peace of knowing I had reclaimed myself. Marcus lost his reputation, yes, but I gained something more. Strength, self-respect, a deeper understanding of people and of myself. I had learned that betrayal is not the end. It is a test, and how you respond to that test shapes the person you become. I could have remained broken, bitter, forever replaying the pain. But instead, I chose to act, carefully, quietly, with precision. And in doing so, I transformed the story. I saw him once more, weeks later, purely by chance. He was walking down the street, alone. No entourage. No phone glued to his ear. His shoulders, once tall and proud, slumped forward. His face, once full of arrogant smiles, looked tired, almost ordinary. People passed him without a second glance. The world had moved on. And in that moment, I understood. This was his true downfall. Not the headlines, not the lost deals. The real punishment was invisibility. The man who once lived for recognition had become a ghost in plain sight. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel hate. I felt nothing at all. And that, I realized, was the truest victory. The story was finished. The betrayal had been exposed. The revenge had been executed. The fallout had settled like dust after a storm. And me? I walked away with my head higher, my spirit lighter. I carried scars, yes, but scars are proof of survival. Proof that I had faced fire and walked out of it stronger. In the end, Marcus was just a chapter in my story. A painful one, but not the final one. Because while betrayal had nearly broken me, revenge had given me closure. And life had given me another chance to begin again. But here's the truth I had to face. Revenge, no matter how cleanly executed, does not erase the pain. It only redirects it. And what I did next, how I chose to live after the storm, mattered far more than the storm itself. The dust had finally settled. The echoes of confrontation, the gasps of witnesses, the silence that followed the storm. It all now felt like fragments of another lifetime. And yet, as I sat alone, staring at the quiet night sky, I realized that revenge, no matter how cleverly planned or perfectly executed, was never the final destination. It was only a bridge between the pain of betrayal and the rediscovery of myself. For days I walked through the city, hearing whispers, stories being told in hushed voices about what had happened. My name was no longer the one in question. It was his, the betrayer, the one who had tried to twist loyalty into advantage, who thought trust was something disposable. His downfall was on everyone's lips. But me? I felt no joy in it. No victory dance. No celebration. Because the truth was simple. Revenge doesn't erase betrayal. It only exposes it. And as I thought back to every moment I had spent building trust, every smile I had believed in, every promise I had taken to heart, I realized that the real story wasn't about him breaking me. It was about me refusing to stay broken. Betrayal changes you. Not just in the way you see others, but in the way you see yourself. At first I blamed myself. Was I too blind? Too trusting? Too hopeful that loyalty still meant something in this world? But the deeper I reflected, the clearer it became. Trust is not weakness. It is strength. Because to trust means you're brave enough to open your heart, knowing it can be wounded. To believe in someone despite the risks is not foolishness, it's courage. And those who betray, they do not destroy the value of trust. They only reveal their inability to honor it. I won't lie. There was satisfaction in watching his mask fall, in seeing the truth shine so brightly that no one could deny it anymore. There was power in silence, in letting my actions speak louder than any outburst could. But the real gift of revenge was not in his destruction. It was in my awakening. Revenge showed me the strength I had overlooked in myself. The patience, the cleverness, the resilience. It reminded me that even in the darkest betrayal, I had the ability to rise, to reclaim the narrative, to stand without trembling. And in that moment I understood, revenge wasn't about him. It was about me finding my power again. But make no mistake, betrayal always comes with a cost. For him, it was reputation, respect, the false empire he had tried to build on broken trust. For me, the cost was different. It was the part of my heart that could never look at trust the same way again. Because once you've been betrayed, even if you heal, a scar remains. A scar that whispers warnings when someone new comes along. A scar that reminds you to listen closely to red flags you once ignored. And maybe that's the true curse of betrayal. It never fully leaves. It reshapes you. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he ever thinks about what he did. if he regrets it, if he wishes he had chosen loyalty instead of greed, truth instead of lies. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But that doesn't matter anymore, because betrayal is not a reflection of the one betrayed. It is a mirror of the betrayer's soul, and his reflection was something he could never escape. So what did I learn from it all? That trust is precious. That once broken, it can never be fully restored. That people who betray often do so not because we are unworthy of loyalty, but because they are unworthy of trust. I learned that silence can be the loudest revenge. That truth, once revealed, is sharper than any blade. And that the sweetest victory is not in watching someone else fall, but in standing tall yourself, untouched by their shadows. If you've ever been betrayed, you know the ache. You know the way it shakes your foundation, makes you question every smile, every word, every memory. But hear me clearly. Betrayal is not your end. It is your beginning. It is the fire that forges strength, the storm that clears the path, the lesson that sharpens your instincts. And revenge? Revenge is not always about striking back. Sometimes the quietest, most powerful revenge is simply living so fully, so unapologetically, that the betrayer fades into the background of your story. As I close this chapter of my life, there is one truth that will forever stay with me. A betrayer's greatest punishment is not the revenge we take, but the life they must live, knowing they lost someone who trusted them with everything. And that is a sentence far heavier than anything I could have planned.